Over the past 50 years, 3,000 ships and 100 planes have gone missing in a mysterious stretch of water in the Atlantic Ocean. One minute, they are there. The next, they've vanished. They all have one thing in common. They all ventured into the Bermuda Triangle. They are paradise destinations for tourists. The Sunshine Coast of Florida and the Florida Keys. The sun-baked island of Puerto Rico and the Bahamas, and the beautiful coral seas of Bermuda. But the surrounding waters hold a mystery that has been known by many names. The Devil's Triangle, the Devil's Seas, Graveyard of the Atlantic. But one name given to these infamous waters strikes fear into the hearts of those who attempt to cross it. The Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle lies off the eastern seaboard of the United States, bordered by the Florida Keys, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. 1.5 million square miles of empty ocean.
The Bermuda Triangle is a place where people disappear mysteriously, and it has no logical, no conventional, no natural explanation.
But many scientists believe there are logical explanations. Extreme weather, rare magnetic anomalies affecting navigation, and even gas bubbles rising from the ocean floor.
It is possible that bubbles from the ocean floor can sink a ship.
And yet, the legends remain. In places like Miami, where Navy aircraft disappeared on a routine exercise that cost the lives of 27 men.
How can you lose 5 aircraft? And it's a good question. It's a question that still is around today.
The Bahamas, where one man claims to have traveled through time.
We experienced a space-time warp of 100 miles in 30 minutes.
In Bermuda, where strange occurrences are said to affect ships.
All my electronical instruments went haywire.
And over the vast Atlantic waters, where pilots lose their reason.
The plane was shuddering and the instruments were gone and we didn't know what the hell was going on.
Miami, the Sunshine City. Beautiful beaches. A water sports paradise. It lies near the southeastern tip of the Bermuda Triangle on the coast of Florida. Miami's beaches attract 11 million visitors a year. It's a departure point for hundreds of cruise ships and flights over the Bermuda Triangle. Half a century ago, another flight from here terrified 2 young naval men. "19-year-old identical twins, George and David Rothschild, were flying home because of a sudden death in their family.
We were very anxious due to the fact that we were going to go to our father's funeral.
The twins flew north from the Florida Keys over the waters of the Bermuda Triangle.
We'd been flying for probably 20 or 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, the pilot yelled out, "The instruments are dead. We have no more instruments." And he became very frantic.
With the instruments malfunctioning, the pilot had no idea where he was, or even how much gas remained in the fuel tanks.
He said, "I'm afraid we're going to run out of fuel." And he hollered to us, "Please look out the starboard window. What can you see? Look out the port window, go back and forth." So in the meantime, the plane was shuddering and the instruments were gone, and we didn't know what the hell was going on. And he said, "Can you see planes? Can you see ships down there? Can you see land? Anything? Please help us on this."
The pilot became panic-stricken.
The pilot said, "I'm too nervous, I can't fly." So the co-pilot had to take over and continue with the flight.
Over water, with fuel running low, the twins were also getting desperate.
And we were looking for some hope, something to see, but we saw nothing. All we saw was ocean. We were over the ocean.
Finally, after what seemed like hours, they spotted the coastline.
When we finally got to Norfolk and they landed, then, of course, I was so happy I kissed the ground, the dirt that we were on. As a matter of fact, Dave wouldn't fly in a plane for over 20 years after that experience. Right. Yeah.
The flight took place a decade before the Bermuda Triangle earned its infamous reputation.
We had no idea what the Bermuda Triangle was or what the effect of the Bermuda Triangle was. And later on, we said, that was it. Yeah. We were there, and that's that's what happened. That's what affected our plane. Unfortunately, we survived it.
The pilot of the Rothschild's plane lost his nerve because his instruments malfunctioned, or so he believed. But could the vast expanse of the Bermuda Triangle have affected his mind? Perhaps, in his moment of madness, he believed the dials were broken because they weren't telling him what his mind was telling him. One man who knows how such confusion can happen is flying instructor Robert Grant.
It's all part of the mind playing games, and you have to control it. I've been flying over water for several thousand hours, and when I get a long ways from land, the ears perk up. You start hearing sounds in the airplane that you haven't heard since the last time you were over open water.
Grant is an expert on spatial disorientation, or vertigo, the condition where a pilot loses his sense of up and down and left to right and starts to panic. He flies over the Florida Keys, the southeastern tip of the Bermuda Triangle. Here, the afternoon heat haze can disguise where the sea ends and the sky begins.
We fly the airplane by outside references, and our main outside reference that we fly by is the horizon. We can determine pitch up, pitch down, left and right turn by looking out at the horizon. And without the horizon, things become very, very difficult. With the haze, heavy haze in the summer, especially here, we can not differentiate between the sky and the water. There is no horizon, and that can lead to vertigo.
And the confusion of vertigo can cause a pilot to make completely irrational decisions.
Let's take, for instance, your airplane is going into, say, a right-hand turn. Your mind is telling you that you are actually going into a left-hand turn. So if you don't believe the instrument and you believe your mind, guess what happens? You turn more right. And the more right you turn, the more vertigo sets in. You know, spatial disorientation is another word that we use to describe that. And it's hard to explain, but let me tell you, when it happens, it's a very scary thing. And vertigo, unfortunately, has killed people. And if you don't recover from what's happening and believe your instruments and get the plane straight and level, you end up crashing. And Vertigo happens a lot more than we care to admit in this business.
So, could vertigo have been responsible for the confusion of the Rothschild's pilot?
Back in the 40s, those pilots were relying solely on a magnetic compass. And there was a certain amount of guesswork involved. And I certainly take my hat off to those people that flew back then, because they had a lot of guts to do what they did. You get away from land and you're strictly relying on your compass for direction.
Grant believes the confusion that can bedevil a pilot over open water may explain some of the Bermuda Triangle disappearances.
Well, when you look at history, we've certainly lost ships and we've lost airplanes in the area called the Bermuda Triangle. I call it the den of iniquity because you know, it's just so easy to get lost out there.
An average of 5 planes still go missing here every year. But more than 50 years ago, the Bermuda Triangle claimed that many aircraft in just one day. Florida, a magnet for sun worshippers from around the world. But in 1945, the beachgoers were military men and their wives from naval air stations dotted along the Florida coast. Although the Second World War had ended 3 months earlier, millions were still in the armed forces. Memories of conflict were never far away, and the air was filled each day with TBM Avenger bombers on training missions. At the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, rows of Avenger bombers stood ready. But one training mission was to lead to the most perplexing Bermuda Triangle mystery of all. Flight 19, the Lost Patrol. A mystery studied for the past 10 years by author Gian Quasar.
It was 2:10 p.m. in the afternoon, December 5, 1945. 5 Navy TBM Avenger bombers took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale for a routine training flight over the Atlantic.
The Avenger bomber was the Navy's largest single-engine plane, and more than able to handle the weather that day of broken cloud and 12 miles visibility. As the 5 planes of Flight 19 headed out into the Bermuda Triangle, 14 young men were on board, Navy flyers like these pictured at the base a few days earlier. Ironically, the flight was a routine lesson in advanced navigation. The route, 316 nautical miles, took them east over Hen and Chicken Shoals, north over Bahamian Islands, and westwards back to the base, a course that lay inside the Bermuda Triangle. Within half an hour, they reached their target at Hen and Chicken Shoals and spent 20 minutes dropping practice bombs. But on the next leg of the exercise, an hour and a half into the mission, the leader, Flight Lieutenant Charles Taylor, got into trouble.
He became completely confused. Neither of his compasses were working, and he believed he was lost.
What does your compass read? I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn. What does your compass read? I am lost at present time. I'm over small islands, believed to be the Florida Keys.
The mission was familiar to naval photographer John Evans.
I had made the same flight that Flight 19 made, and it was just nothing. It was a very cinchy flight. You go east, make a one turn, then come back to the west. How can you get lost?
Radio operators ashore could hear the pilots, but the lost pilots could barely hear their base.
I'm sure now that neither of my compasses are working.
With the planes burning 70 gallons of gas an hour, the radio operators were helpless voyeurs to the deadly drama unfolding in the skies above the Bermuda Triangle.
We were flight 270 degrees until we hit the beach. We'll run out of gas. All planes fly close formation. When one plane drops to 10 gallons of gas, all planes will land together. We have no other land in sight.
By 6 p.m., with less than an hour's worth of fuel remaining, the radio messages became more desperate.
We may have to ditch. We may have to ditch any minute. We may have to ditch.
At 4 minutes past 7, a final faint radio message was heard.
Fox Tare. Fox Tare. Fox Tare.
It was the call sign of planes from the Fort Lauderdale base. Then, the radios fell silent. With tanks drained of gas, the 5 Avenger bombers must have ditched in the ocean.
The Navy procedure was if one of the planes got lost, everybody ditched, the whole flight ditched, because it would be much easier for the search and rescue people to pick these folks up. The drills were constant on saving your life after you ditched. You had flares, you had Mae West, you had life jackets on.
Despite worsening weather conditions, 242 planes searched for days for the missing men. Among the search team was Fort Lauderdale naval pilot David White.
The weather did get bad. There was a front that came through, the wind changed, but for the first day we went out, we expected to see them floating out here. The TPM really was a good, steady airplane. You could land them in the water, pull out the 3-man life raft, and not even get your feet wet.
The search covered more than 250,000 square miles of ocean, but found nothing.
The flight never, to anybody's knowledge, made it back to land. No trace was ever found in an intensive search. And that's basically the mystery. How can 5 aircraft disappear on a very simple maneuver? And there's simply no trace ever found, no way to really understand what happened.
So what could have happened to Flight 19? Many believe that with his compasses mysteriously not working, flight leader Charles Taylor made a fatal and utterly inexplicable error. Taylor saw land below him that he thought he recognized as being in the Florida Keys, an area he knew well.
I'm over small islands, believed to be the Florida Keys.
But almost certainly, what he saw was an island 200 miles away in the Bahamas. But even if Taylor did make such an error, a further Flight 19 mystery remains. Why would 13 other airmen follow him into thousands of square miles of empty ocean?
He's the senior man. You know, he's got thousands of hours in the air, and the students follow the leader. That's what they're taught to do.
Why 1 or 2 of them didn't defect and say, to hell with it, I'd rather be court-martialed than to die, no one knows.
People say to me, well, what if you'd been a student and you knew that he was wrong? Good question. I probably would have headed west and gone back to Florida.
But the Bermuda Triangle had not yet had its fill of tragedy that day. A flying boat involved in the search also vanished with 13 more men on board. An explosion was reported, but no wreckage was ever found. The first official inquiry into Flight 19's disappearance blamed Lieutenant Taylor.
The conclusion was that the flight leader became so hopelessly confused as to have suffered something akin to a mental aberration.
A later report cleared Taylor and concluded cause unknown. Rumors circulated that investigators had said it's as if they'd gone to Mars.
That's when it all started, and that's when the people began to question, how can you lose 5 aircraft? And it's a good question. It's a question that still is around today. Blame it on aliens from outer space, or you can blame it on the stupidity of the pilot.
Well, of course, I've heard the theories about they were taken up to Mars, but I can't see any credibility to anything other than he got lost and they landed in the ocean.
It should never have happened. And that's what gave rise to all these feelings about the Bermuda Triangle, or some alien or some mist came in, or whatever it was.
More than half a century later, speculation continues. Every December 5th at Fort Lauderdale, they hold a memorial service for the missing men. But now, there are astonishing rumors that one plane had successfully ditched and that Flight Lieutenant Taylor could still be alive.
I heard about 2.5 years ago that Taylor has survived. The Bahamians picked him up, and he was worried that he'd be blamed for it. But that would give credence to the thought that why should I, if I let them know I'm still alive, I might be court-martialed. And I think he would have been. He finally married an island woman, and it's an interesting theory. And then every time on the 5 December when they have the memorial service, I look around for some guy about 78, 79, 80, and it's an incredible thing to think about.
It was the disappearance of Flight 19 that first brought the Bermuda Triangle to the public's attention. But the triangle was striking terror into the hearts of men centuries earlier.
New World explorers used to call this the Isle of Devils because of the awful screams and sounds that would emanate from the island, and especially at night.
By the late 1950s, the waters off the Florida coast were infamous. It was rumored that those who ventured into the Triangle disappeared without trace, like the 14 young men of Flight 19. The area was first called the Bermuda Triangle in 1955. Since then, many have attempted to explain the mystery. For years, one author has examined the facts behind each missing ship and plane and listed them all on his website. He is Gian Quasar.
I first started merely to document the Bermuda Triangle. I was not setting myself up to solve it or to confirm any mystery. I wanted to see if it was still going on.
Quasar discovered that it is still going on. The question is, why?
What is so sudden that can cause a disappearance? It's hard to say. That's why there's the great mystery of the triangle.
On average, 60 ships and 5 planes go missing each year in these mysterious waters.
It's a mystery. It's a real-life mystery. It's a real-life detective story, and you're going to want to find the answer.
Bermuda, the island that gave its name to the Bermuda Triangle. It's a beautiful but remote island, 650 miles from the American mainland across some of the world's most notorious waters.
Some of the greatest mysteries have actually happened around Bermuda. Some of the biggest vessels, like Sylvia El Osa in 1976, was a 590-foot vessel that apparently blew to pieces after she signaled herself 140 miles from Bermuda. The cargo ship Poet in 1980, after signaling north of Bermuda, she vanished. The weather was choppy, but it was not enough to cause a 520-foot vessel to sink without cause.
The island is a subtropical paradise, 1/3 the size of Washington, D.C., fringed with the purest pink coral sands on Earth. Each year, the 65,000 population swells with 500,000 visitors, most of them Americans arriving by cruise ship.
We just got married.
Yep,
We're
newlyweds
on
out
a
on a honeymoon.
I love it
Beautiful.
here. I love the beach. The water is gorgeous.
Be they residents or visitors, they are all greeted by one of the island's most well-known fixtures, Johnny Barnes. He's been here for decades, and now he has a statue in his honor. The offshore Bermuda reefs are home to a rich variety of undersea life. 600 species of fish inhabit these waters. It's a paradise for scuba divers. Although, with a few species you don't want to meet, unless they are safely behind glass. The Bermuda Aquarium is one of the island's most popular tourist attractions.
Hello, good morning. How are you? Welcome to the aquarium.
Head of the aquarium is native-born Bermudian Jennifer Gray.
Bermuda is the most beautiful place on earth because we're an oceanic island surrounded by pristine, warm waters. There's not a lot of poverty, there's not a lot of crime. It's just a very exquisite island.
In centuries past, before the Bermuda Triangle gained its notoriety, nobody wanted to land here. It was a fearful place.
Prior to colonization in the early 1600s, New World explorers used to call this the Isle of Devils because of the awful screams and sounds that would emanate from the island, and especially at night. And of course later, when they colonized the islands, they discovered that this noise was coming from the endemic cahao, very rare bird that's known only to Bermuda, and also pigs that had come off of shipwrecks.
Not surprising then that young islanders are raised on legends of the Bermuda Triangle.
I remember as a child myself being absolutely in awe of this somewhat scary Bermuda Triangle or hole in space, whatever it may be. But of course visitors are often hearing about it for the first time and take it quite seriously.
Planes disappear and ships disappear and, you know, all the stuff that you hear on television through movies, but we're hoping that we're not going to be one of those subjects. We don't want to disappear. We want to enjoy the rest of our lives.
Well, I've heard that, you know, if you fly over the Bermuda Triangle or get anywhere close enough for it, you happen to disappear and no one ever hears from you again.
The island marks the northernmost point of the Bermuda Triangle, and here it is also at its deepest.
We really are in very, very deep water, and it drops off around us very steeply into nothing.
Bermuda is a remote coral reef perched precariously on top of a massive, extinct volcano surrounded by the vast Atlantic Ocean more than a mile deep. One man who knows these waters well is fisherman Sloan Wakefield. And he has a wary respect for the surrounding seas.
The waters here, you really have to know them. You don't want to be caught in an area where there's reef and you're not sure where you are, because a boat drawing any more than 2 feet of water will run aground. To describe it in a nutshell, it's treacherous.
Sloan and his crewman, Mark Moran, catch wahoo and mahi-mahi for local restaurants and marlin for sporting fun.
So what we do when we're fishing is we run out to the edge, what we call the edge, which would be the side of the volcano, and we troll along anywhere from 4,000 feet of water to 200 feet of water, because that's how sheer the drop-off is.
The fishermen believe that some Bermuda Triangle disappearances can be attributed to natural causes, like the weather.
Because we are a dot in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, we get weather from everywhere, and it can change in a heartbeat. 1 minute we're looking at good weather, and the next minute you got a low front coming through.
At one point this year we saw probably 15, maybe 20-foot seas out there, and you know, the boat, it's like a feather on the wind on those waves.
But in these waters, odd things can happen. Wakefield has had one experience he still can't explain.
All my electronical instruments went haywire. Watch out the wrecker! And once my instruments came back on, I was completely heading in the other direction. I was probably about 4 miles past where I was supposed to be. A lot of people were saying, oh, your instruments might have been shorting out. They've never shorted out before that, and they haven't shorted out since. That's the encounter that I personally have had with what's called the Bermuda Triangle.
The waters known as the Bermuda Triangle lie between the subtropical resorts of Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Thousands of tourists are attracted here from all over the world. More than 800,000 craft are registered in Florida alone, along with countless other commercial vessels and visiting cruise ships. These waters normally promise sunshine and calm seas. But sometimes there are hurricanes. Atlantic hurricanes are born off the African coast, feeding on energy and moisture from the warm tropical waters. The tracks of these storms reveal how, over the past 100 years, they head for America and how often they veer off towards the Bermuda Triangle. At the National Hurricane Center in Miami, the storms in the Bermuda Triangle are studied by meteorologists such as Jim Lucchine.
Hurricanes are very frequent out in the Bermuda Triangle area there. In fact, more hurricanes in that particular area than any other in the Atlantic Basin.
And a hurricane is a sailor's greatest fear.
The mariner may not know which way to look. Sometimes the weather may be coming from one direction, sometimes it may be coming from the other direction.
In November 2001, the media besieged the Miami Weather Center as Hurricane Michelle bore down on this corner of the triangle.
And we expect these winds regardless of where Michelle actually goes.
As Michelle devastated the island of Cuba, residents were ordered to evacuate the Florida Keys. At the last moment, Michelle weakened a little and swerved away into the Atlantic. The whole of Florida, however, was lashed with rain. As night fell and the downpour reached Miami, tourists at South Beach celebrated their narrow escape with a hurricane party. But even events on a smaller scale than hurricanes can be just as deadly. Thunderstorms. Thunderstorms are one plausible explanation for some of the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle, like the disappearance of an historic ship in 1986. The Pride of Baltimore vanished suddenly from radar screens 240 miles north of Puerto Rico. The disappearance was a complete mystery. Then 4 days and 7 hours later, 8 survivors were found. They revealed that the ship had been hit by a microburst. 100-mile-an-hour winds blasting from the bottom of a freak thunderstorm.
There were some very strong thunderstorms in the area, but what happened was a very small-scale microburst occurred right in the vicinity of this tall ship, which was sunk in the downburst, we think, with unfortunately a great loss of life. And that's what happens in these downbursts, and those are probably responsible for some of the sinkings in the ocean and in the Bermuda Triangle.
But there are other, even more unpredictable dangers in the Bermuda Triangle. Waterspouts. Some waterspouts are tornadoes that move out to sea. Others are formed when rotating columns of air drop from thunderclouds to whip up a vortex of spray. The moisture condenses, forming a writhing column connecting the sea to the clouds. Could these elegant but dangerous waterspouts account for some triangle disappearances? One man who might know the answer is Jim Edds, a keen amateur fisherman who chases and films waterspouts for fun.
It's going to be coming across the frame here. Really moving pretty good. Quick, quick, run! Oh, this is beautiful.
I'm always in search of the best waterspout footage I can get. Get up close on a boat, film it from the air.
Perfect.
See the water coming up? You get a little smarter and you get a little closer each summer.
Monster waterspout.
In open water, waterspouts can be deadly, particularly at night.
If you're out there at night and a waterspout develops, it can flip your vessel over. And if it's a tornadic waterspout, the really big waterspouts, the strong ones, the ones with high velocity, you may not see that. You may get stuck in it. You may hear it. You may feel the water spray ring around you, but there's nothing you can do if you don't see it. Certainly, you can't rule out the possibility of waterspouts to explain the disappearance of ships in the Bermuda Triangle.
As a fisherman, Edds knows of other dangers within the Bermuda Triangle.
When you're offshore in this area, one of the things you have to watch out for is what we call rips. Those are areas, that are little eddies in the Gulf Stream that jack up the waves a lot higher than what you're used to. And especially if the wind is blowing against the current, it can go from a 2 to 3 foot surf maybe to a 5 to 6 foot. And when you get in there, it's just like a washing machine. So you really have to pay attention that you don't slide down and nose down into a wave.
Disappearances have been reported out there for over 200 years before the modern mystery of the Triangle. Probably the most famous is the USS Cyclops. It was in 1918. She carried wireless. She had 309 U.S. Navy crew aboard. She was a U.S. naval collier. And she left British Barbados en route to Baltimore, and she never was seen again. It just went down as the greatest mystery of the sea. Woodrow Wilson, the president, said only God in the sea knows where the great ship has gone.
The Bahamas, a necklace of islands that lie in the Atlantic Ocean 100 miles from the Florida coast. Here, the weather and the waters can be deceptively beautiful.
What's interesting about the disappearances in the Bahamas is that the Bahama Bank is no more than 50 feet shallow, and yet no ship, no aircraft has been found on the bottom. No trace has ever been found of those that disappeared.
The Bahamas attracts 4 million visitors each year. Nearly half the population work in the tourism industry. Boating is one of the most popular attractions among the 700 islands, only 23 of which are inhabited.
The main danger around here is the Bahamas is a very beautiful place, and people often get a false sense of security in terms of the danger that they may face. We have cold fronts that sweep across from Florida, and in a matter of an hour can change the weather from just the perfect day to an absolute nightmare. It often means coastal boating can be quite dangerous.
Vessel hailing Mayday, this is Bahamas ASC Rescue Nassau. Captain, what is the nature of distress in your location, over?
We're out here trying to fish on the north side.
Helping ships in distress in this part of the Triangle is the job of the Bahamas Air Sea Rescue Association. Their volunteer sailors see many baffling cases, but believe most are caused by human error.
Bermuda Triangle, I've always been fascinated with it. People disappear all the time. It's easy to die out there, especially when there's no help. My own opinion is that although you don't know exactly what happened in every case, I think almost every case is explainable by human error. I mean, there are so many ways to get yourself killed on the sea. To assume every time someone is missing is due to a mysterious factor, I believe is stretching it, but you never know.
But perhaps there are forces other than wind, waves, and weather affecting the Triangle's waters. At the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute are thousands of artifacts raised from the ocean depths. They come from shipwrecks scattered around the island's reefs. But visitors also discover that scientific theory has a part to play in explaining the disappearances of the Bermuda Triangle. The Institute's director is Ralph Richardson.
There are some scientific theories about the Bermuda Triangle. One includes large pockets of gas, which, because of seismic activity and so on, escape from the ocean's bottom.
Scientists have discovered that huge bubbles of methane gas can violently erupt without warning from the ocean floor.
You can imagine a ship sailing on the ocean, and a large pocket of gas just surrounds it. The ship then loses its buoyancy and disappears from sight without warning. That is one of the theories of the Bermuda Triangle.
At least one oil rig is thought to have been sunk by a methane gas eruption, but nobody knew whether the bubbles could actually sink a ship at sea. Bruce DiNardo, an expert in fluid dynamics at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, is now researching just how dangerous those bubbles can be.
Let's imagine a body that's floating in water. The reason it's floating, a body that's heavier than air, is that the greater depth you are, the greater the pressure. So a body, along its bottom, it's going to feel this greater pressure, and the pressure will keep it floating. If you add bubbles, you lower the density of the water. The bubbles take up space, the volume of the water will expand, but the mass of the water stays the same, so the buoyant force will decrease. As I increase the amount of bubbles, the ball will sit deeper in the fluid, and eventually we get to a critical point where the ball sinks. Now, what might happen in the ocean is that there is a burst of bubbles. We can show that here by just turn on and then turn off the air. You can see that the ball sinks. If this were a ship and it took on enough water, it would sink to the bottom and stay there. In the ocean, there is something like a methane eruption. The source of bubbles will be localized. They will rise, but there'll be water outside where there are no bubbles. But the fact that it can sink there is, to me, that's proof that a ship can sink in the ocean. I don't need to say, I wouldn't even say theoretically. I mean, it is possible that bubbles from the ocean floor can sink a ship.
Methane gas eruptions may account for some missing ships, but they can never answer all the questions.
I believe we will solve it eventually, so long as we don't deny that it does go on.
But there is one story of the Bermuda Triangle that seems to defy every rational explanation, a tale that, if true, would bend the very laws of nature. The waters of the Bermuda Triangle, infamous and mysterious. But do more ships and planes vanish here than anywhere else on Earth?
What sets the triangle apart from other oceans is that there is a higher number of disappearances of both ships and aircraft in the area. There are other sections of ocean where there is comparable traffic, where the Coast Guard answers an equal number of maydays. But in the triangle, there is a greater proportion of disappearances where nothing is found. There is no SOS usually. There's no electronic maydays issued. There's no trace found in most instances.
And those disappearances have spawned some fantastic theories.
There are those who believe that UFOs from outer or inner space are kidnapping people. There are those who believe that the electromagnetic phenomena are capable of causing dimensional transmutations and time warps, time tunnels. They're all reported out there.
One of those time discrepancies is said to have happened here in the Bahamas. Property developer Bruce Gernon has been flying to and from here for more than 30 years. But no flight was as strange as the one he made with his father on the 4th of December, 1970. Father and son planned to fly from Andros Town Airport in the Bahamas, heading more than 100 miles across the sea to Palm Beach. The weather was fine as they took off, just after 3 p.m.
The first unusual thing that I saw that day was a lenticular cloud that was hovering over the Great Bahama Bank, at least 60,000 feet high. And my airplane wasn't capable of flying over it. It was very intense with huge flashes going on rapidly at a random pace. I noticed an opening in the clouds, like a huge U-shape opening. But as I approached it, the top of the opening closed and it became a horizontal tunnel that appeared to be between 10 and 15 miles long. And when the aircraft entered the tunnel, these lines appeared and they were rotating counterclockwise. It was difficult to keep it level and concentrate on the other end of the tunnel, which was aiming directly for Miami.
Gernon says he emerged from the tunnel to find it closing behind him. His airplane soon became engulfed in a peculiar mist.
I checked my instruments and they didn't appear to be working well.
He claims that once inside this mist, the airplane disappeared. Air traffic control, he says, could no longer see him on their radar screens.
We were caught inside this strange fog with the instruments malfunctioning and the air traffic controller unable to help us. And then the air traffic controller came back on the radio screaming that he had an airplane directly over Miami Beach. I looked at my watch and we had only been flying just over 30 minutes. So we should still be at least 80 or 90 miles away from Miami.
Gernon landed at 3:48 p.m.
I landed in Palm Beach, and the flight took only 45 minutes. And I had made that flight dozens of times before, and it always took about an hour and 20 minutes, sometimes an hour and a half.
Gernon has never been able to come up with a rational explanation for how he made the flight so quickly. But despite the skepticism of others, he has never stopped searching for an answer.
Well, after researching it for many years, I've come to the conclusion that we experienced a space-time warp of 100 miles in 30 minutes. Just didn't make sense until I started researching time and what it can do in the Bermuda Triangle.
The flight changed Gernon's life. He is now writing a book about the experience. Miami, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas are all popular tourist destinations attracting travelers from around the globe. Most enter and leave the Bermuda Triangle in safety. But still, the mystery remains. Pilot error, water spouts, hurricanes, riptides, thunderstorms, time warps, and disorientation. All possible explanations for this seemingly inexplicable mystery. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle.